Well, good morning and good evening to everybody who's watching and anything in between that. I'm Arthur Asadurian, and as you can see with me, we have Tyson James. And we'll have Tyson introduce himself in a little bit and what he does and all the fun stuff that he gets to interact with and in. I want to thank you guys for joining us, and I want to ask you to share this out. Even if you're watching the replay, you can still share out videos. That just helps any YouTube video you're watching. So it'll be really cool for you guys to share it out, get the word out there, because we are trying to grow as a YouTube channel, and we need all the help we can get because, as many of you guys know, there's lots and lots and lots of content on YouTube. And so it really helps when you share it out, when you give it a thumbs up, when you comment. That also helps. Believe it or not, it helps. Interactions help because it shows that, excuse me, it helps show that people are actually interacting with this video and are interested in the video and all that stuff. So all of this stuff works. Share that. I want to thank you guys. Okay, so Tyson, we're going to jump into it. We were actually just having a conversation about languages, and Tyson speaks a number, and I speak two. So why don't we start there? How many languages do you speak? What are they? Why do you even speak them? is a question, and then we'll jump into our topic.
So I have to tell a language joke real quick. So I took a Spanish class in high school, and my teacher, she had a poster on her door, and it said, "What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages?" Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 1 language? Probably American.
So
it's kind of true.
it's probably true, unless you count like Southern dialects of language, which you probably could.
Yeah, I grew up in Arkansas, so that's like a whole different dialect right there.
Yeah, well, I speak Texan, right?
Yeah.
So it's crazy because here in Armenia, people are generally trilingual. They speak Armenian, which is obviously the native language, and just everybody speaks it. People speak Russian because that's an important language you need to know in this region. And also, Armenia was dominated by, the USSR for about 70 years. So the Russian was, I think Russian was the legal language, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Like all the documentation, everything was in Russian, obviously for Moscow to be able to, connect with that. And then now, in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, English has become a pretty dominant language here. There's a tech boom in Armenia. There's a lot of programmers coming out of Armenia, and they're actually developing really cool stuff. For those who want to invest in Armenia in the tech industry, you can. By the way, I'm serious. It's a good idea because you will get your money's worth.
You're gonna have to give me some stock tips offline.
Oh yeah. It's just it's got pretty cool stuff coming out of it, and I keep an eye out. It's like it's cool. So people tend to be trilingual. It's just and then like you'll meet someone who's like speaks French and speaks, I don't know, a bunch of other languages, and you're like, well, where'd you come from? 6, 7 languages. But so how did you? So you okay? What are those languages you speak?
Yeah, so I have an undergrad degree in Spanish. So I actually took 4 years of Spanish in high school and have a college degree in Spanish, and then worked in some industries after I got out of college that employed my Spanish. So I got pretty good at that. And then I entered the Air Force as a linguist. And and so I know Spanish and Arabic. And I took a few semesters of both Russian and Hebrew as well. So, yeah.
Man.
I just really enjoyed taking language courses. It was just something that I've always been fascinated by, and just it's amazing that even if you learn a little bit of another language, it just opens up a whole new world of communication with many people. So Yeah,
Yeah.
really
So,
enjoy
okay.
it.
For the Russian speakers, privet. Privet.
Привет.
um, okay. Does philosophy count as a language? Because I think it should. Um, I actually have a
You
picture.
know, in conversations with my wife, she sometimes accuses me of speaking a totally different
Oh,
language.
amen. That's what my wife asked. Okay,
You know how.
you gotta explain that. So it's funny because I have a picture at from the Biola library or the book. You know, like when semester starts, they have section of it becomes a book sale section and stuff. So I was looking through some books, and then they had like a bunch of Plato's writings in the languages section, and I took a picture of it. Said, "Hey, that's probably true. It is a foreign language, and because right, and we'll use probably some of these terms today. That's the reason why I say this because I didn't have an undergrad degree in philosophy when I started my master's program at Talbot, and I remember sitting in class. Specifically, I remember sitting in epistemology class, and I was like, I know those words, but they're not being used the way I know them. Wait, what? You know, certainty. That's not the way I use certainty, right? When I say I'm certain of something, it's just like, yeah, I'm sure of it, and it's like they got to qualify it and explain it. So I do think it should be probably qualified as as a language. So we'll just jump into it. Some of you guys are sitting there and saying, well, Art, you just did a stream on Molinism, right, with Tim Stratton. Why are you doing another stream on Molinism? Because I want it's a complicated subject, and I wanted Tim and I spoke more about kind of Calvinism, Arminianism, Molinism, how that interacts with that, and we'll kind of mention that. But I wanted to speak to Tyson specifically about probably the main doctrine that grounds Molinism in a certain way. Would that be fair to say, Tyson?
Hmm.
This understanding of what's called middle knowledge. And so we're going to have Tyson explain to us what middle knowledge is. And then we got a bunch of follow-up questions on that. And for those who are watching, feel free to write down, put down some comments and questions if you have them, because wherever you may stand on the subject, at least understand it right. I know there was recently some controversy, and I haven't seen these videos, so I can't comment on them very much. But James White made a video and put it out there, and I think some people were saying, well, it doesn't seem like you really understand Molinism as you're criticizing it. Again, I haven't seen the video, so we'll watch that when I have some time and then see whether that's true or not. But but we're gonna deal with Calvinism and see whether it's even necessary to criticize at least this aspect of Molinism. So give us a breakdown of what Molinism is, Tyson.
Yeah.
Sorry, what
So,
middle knowledge is, not Molinism. What
yeah.
middle knowledge is? I should correct myself. What is middle knowledge?
Yeah. So, to begin with, that's a big question. So I kind of try to break it down in three different ways. So the first way that I break it down is I say that middle knowledge is an answer to a question. And that question is, how can it be true that God is sovereign over all things and that creatures can be free and therefore morally responsible? So it's an answer to that question. And so to understand middle knowledge, it's helpful to give a little background on how it arose. And I tried to watch that recent video you did with Dr. Tim Stratton to make sure that we're not rehashing a lot of already done information.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear you guys kind of cover some of the biblical foundation for how that concept arose. So I'm going to cover that just a little
Cool.
bit
Yeah.
real quick.
Amazing.
First of all, the Bible affirms both God's divine sovereignty, his sovereignty over all things, and also creaturely freedom and moral responsibility. So passages that deal with God's sovereignty are things like Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 to 30. So that says, are not two sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. right? That expresses God's knowledge of what's going on and his nothing happening outside of his will. And then Romans chapter 11, verse 36 says, "For from him and through him and to him are all things." And then Colossians chapter 1, verse 16 says, "For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him." So those are all very strong verses talking about divine sovereignty. So God is Lord over all. And then the second point there was creaturely freedom and moral responsibility. And so some of the verses that deal with those concepts are verses like Genesis chapter 4, verses 5 to 7. Says, "If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desires contrary to you, but you must rule over it." So there you have the freedom to resist sin and choose the good. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 11 to 19 is where Moses puts the choice before Israel to either follow God and enter the promised land or walk away from God and lose possession of the land, right? That's a choice that they have to make between two options. Ezekiel chapter 18, verses 30 to 32, it says, "Cast away from you all transgressions that you have committed, and make yourselves a new heart and a new spirit. Why will you die, O house of Israel? For I have no pleasure in the death of anyone, declares the Lord God. So turn and live." So there, the option is presented to Israel to either turn away from their sin and follow God, or reject him and go towards death. Okay. And then I would add 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. This is very strong in favor of human freedom. It says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it." So here Paul is writing to Christians, and he's saying that Christians, you have an option. When you are presented with temptation, you can either give into it or resist it. And you have that genuine option. It's not that you're forced to do either one. And so given this biblical data, when the Protestant Reformation came around, there was a Catholic Jesuit counter-reformer named Luis de Molina in the 16th century, and he saw that there were people on kind of both sides of the Reformation who were sort of deviating from the biblical passages on these concepts. And he was like, no, we need to uphold both sides of this, both divine sovereignty and human responsibility and freedom. And so that's what caused him to think about this deeply and come up with the concept of middle knowledge, because he thought that middle knowledge was the concept that was the key to preserving all of that biblical data. And so that's the first way I would answer that question.
Okay. What's the second way that you would answer this question?
The second way I would answer it is that middle knowledge is a concept that affirms, well, I would say that Molinism especially is a concept that affirms two things, and one of them is middle knowledge, and the other one is libertarian freedom. And so these are both important to, I think, what's going to happen later on in the discussion. So First of all, middle knowledge. You guys discussed a lot about what middle knowledge is, so I'm going to try and break it down as quickly and at its most basic core as I can. So philosophers and theologians describe what is included in God's knowledge as three different moments, or three different types of knowledge that all fall under God's omniscience. And so that is what could happen, which is God's natural knowledge, what will happen as a result of God's deciding to create a particular world. That's God's free knowledge. And then in between those, there's this sort of hypothetical knowledge, which is middle knowledge. And that is before God decided to create a particular world, he knew what free creatures he could create and what they would freely do in any particular situation. And so that would is what middle knowledge is.
Yeah.
And so with that information, with that knowledge of what free creatures would do in any situation, he can ensure that his plan will come to fruition because he incorporates that information into his planning of history.
Okay.
Uh,
So I guess that would
You go.
naturally lead us to my second question, which is how does middle knowledge work with God's decision making? Is it the only way he makes decisions? Like, can he not make decisions otherwise? Right? Like, without using it, like he just has to use it. How does it work?
So it's completely up to him whether or not he wants to incorporate his middle knowledge into his planning of history, right? Because he only really needs to employ middle knowledge if he's going to create creatures that have indeterministic behavior or free behavior, and that includes not only free humans, but also free angels, and even possibly indeterministic subatomic particles, like that you'll find in quantum mechanics, where there's quantum indeterminacy. There are certain interpretations of quantum mechanics that are deterministic, but some that are indeterministic. So the indeterministic ones, if they're truly sort of, not determined by prior circumstances, their behavior, then God would need middle knowledge to be certain about what that behavior would be at the quantum level. So those are just some instances of where if God is going to create those entities, then he would need middle knowledge to be able to plan for their behavior in his exhaustive planning of history.
Okay. So some people might say, I was having a conversation. Sorry, can you hear me now?
No, I can't hear you now.
That's funny. Let's see. You sure? Okay, so we're having some issues here. So you still can't hear me?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Wow. Let's see. Okay. Because audio's coming through for me. Okay, so the YouTube audience can hear me. Okay.
Maybe we'll just have to do the whole rest of the video by chat.
Okay, let me see. I might have to, let's see, call you back. Let's do this. Let me turn off Skype. He can't hear me now, so we're going to turn Skype off. Yeah, I know the YouTube audience can hear. and YouTube audience, you guys can hear him as well, right? Like, you guys heard everything he was saying. Okay. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was weird. Because the YouTube audience was able to hear you and everything you said, and they were able to hear me. So that's good. We didn't lose too much content.
Oh, but they couldn't hear you either?
They heard me well. There's no issues.
Huh. So it's just on my end?
Yeah, Skype glitch or something like that. I don't know. Okay. Get thee behind me, Satan, right? So, okay. So I was having a conversation. This is what I was saying. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were speaking about this. And then he said, what's the point of that? It's just like, why are you going through all this stuff? This is just stuff God knows. Like, for him, it was, this is just part of God's knowledge, and I don't need to define it as middle knowledge or something like that, right? Like this.
Sure.
And so what would be a response to someone like that? Now, I must say, my buddy is a Calvinist who said this to me. And he was just like, why are you doing these backflips to explain all this stuff? What's going on? I mean, the conversation led us to speak about whether he actually believes in human freedom the way I believe in it. And
Yeah.
what does that look like within his Calvinistic framework and moral responsibility and all that stuff. So as far as I remember joining a panel discussion a number of years ago at the Evangelical Theological Society conference, where there was a guy who was a Calvinist who also was a Molinist. I'm pretty sure I remember this correctly. So that would be my question, because there's a lot of the responses we get in this dialogue is from individuals who are Calvinists saying this is useless, or you guys on the other side believe this, or something like that. Can one be a Calvinist and believe in middle knowledge? And if they can, what do they need to change, like theologically, right?
Yeah. So Dr. Kirk McGregor actually wrote an article for Stratton's website, freethinkingministries.com. I think the title is "Can You Be a Calvinist and a Molinist?" And Dr. McGregor's answer was yes, in fact, you can, because his wife is one, actually.
There you go.
He's like, I live with one. I'm married to
He's
one,
like, I know
so
at least one.
Yeah. And so I think the important thing, first of all, to note is that Molinism is not a soteriology, right? A soteriology is a doctrine of salvation. And Molinism is not a soteriology. The concepts that fall under Molinism, at least contemporary Molinism as I've defined it today, can be applied to salvation. But it's not necessary to do so. It has many applications outside of the discussion on salvation. So whether or not one can be a Calvinist and a Molinist depends heavily on what one means by Calvinist, right? Can one be a Molinist and still affirm everything that Calvin believed? That's iffy, because if something Calvin said suggested that God does not have middle knowledge, then I don't see how one could be a Molinist and a Calvinist. But I don't think that Calvin actually said anything that would preclude God's having middle knowledge.
Yeah.
But I'm not a Calvin scholar, so I wouldn't be able to say authoritatively, state anything authoritatively on that. So again, that would largely depend on what one means by Calvinist. Now, if one just means by Calvinist the soteriological points, the TULIP acronym, then yes, one could still be a Molinist, affirming middle knowledge, affirming libertarian free will outside of salvation, and you could perfectly affirm middle knowledge for sure. And of course, it fits very snugly with Arminianism. So that's.
So for some people who might be confused, there are Christians who believe in determinism, basically, when it comes to salvation. So salvation is determined, right? Like God's election is just determined, and then libertarian free will on everything else.
Right.
There are individuals of this sort.
And I noticed that most determinists even will want to affirm at least libertarian freedom in one or two circumstances. Number one, Satan. The choice of Satan seems to be, if you're going to say that Satan fell, you have to say either that Satan freely chose or that God caused him to fall, right? That's problematic if you say that God caused Satan to choose evil, right? That does seem problematic. And then also determinists usually want to say that Adam was one of, had at least a free choice, and that he misused his free choice, and then free will vanished.
Or sin impacted in such a way where, the impact of sin or the fall has changed this whole understanding of free will because of our nature. That we, Romans 3, right? that we don't pursue after God, like our free will is kind of destroyed in regards to that. Was Molina, and this is kind of leading, but I heard that Molina was accused of being a Calvinist,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so he got a lot of flack from both sides, really. Um, you know, a little, and Molinists today catch that all the time. Dr. Craig himself, um, who, he'll say that Molinists tend to, get accused of being Calvinists from Arminians and get accused of being Arminians from Calvinists because of the very robust doctrine of divine sovereignty that Molinists tend to affirm, and also the robust doctrine of human freedom, right? And so we want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to have the best of both worlds,
That's right.
and we believe that middle knowledge is the key to being able to have both. And so it does, and I get this all the time, that Molinism, people will say that Molinism seems deterministic because God knows everything in advance, and nothing will occur that happens outside of what He knows will occur. So the question naturally arises: it's like, how can we truly be free if God truly knows for certain what will happen?
Yeah.
And of course, we always, Molinists, have to point out that just because God knows for certain what will happen, that doesn't mean that He is deterministically causing that
Yeah.
to happen.
Now, I'm gonna throw a question at you, and I don't know how much you've thought about this, but I enjoyed this subject a great deal, and I would like
Yeah.
to have Dr. Craig on and ask him about this. Um, I don't know what your view of time is,
Mhm.
right? Because I think when we include a certain kind of view of time in regards to how God knows the future, right? And for those who've never thought about this and would like to, Greg Ganzel has a book called God and Time: Four Views. That's a great introductory book because you will get four different views of God and time, God's relationship with time. Dr. Craig is one of the authors there. Paul Helm represents the kind of Augustinian view of time. Alan Paget, I think, is the other, and then Nick Walterstorff, if I'm not mistaken, is the
Mhm.
fourth view. I think I got all the names in that book correct.
Yeah.
And then also Gary DeWeese has written, man, it's a heavy book. I mean, he's got a book on God and Time. I took God and
There's
Time. I took God and Time with Gary DeWeese, and we had to read through that, and I struggled because there's like the physics and all that stuff. This is way beyond me, right? But I really enjoyed the subject. I've written on it, and then, but it works together. This whole understanding of God's foreknowledge. How does God know the future? Does the future already exist, and then God kind of looks to the future, and then he's like, oh, I see Arthur there, which is typically the view Arminianism has been portrayed. Whether that is the case or that is not, some scholars can debate on that. But God looks into the future, knows you're going to, elect him, and therefore he elects you. This kind of understanding. But a certain kind of view of time is going to help you figure out how God knows the future. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would say that many theologians through the centuries believed that God is timeless, that He remains outside of
Mm-hmm.
time, and that the rest of creation exists in time, and that God sort of has this transcendent vision of all things in a timeless state, and therefore can see the beginning from the end. And that terminology, that language of seeing, is very perceptual. You'll see that throughout history
Mm-hmm.
in theological writings, is that God sees the future. And it sort of suggests, like we use the normal term seeing as looking out a window or a door and, seeing a tree across the way, and God sees the things in the future much like that. He just perceives it. And I think we want to, if we're affirming a particular view of time where the future does not yet exist, like Dr. Craig's A theory of time, he prefers the A theory of time, then the future doesn't yet exist. There's nothing to see. right? The future doesn't yet exist. And so you'll need a different model than that perceptualist language of
Yeah.
seeing the future. And so he makes a distinction between perceptualist under concept of foreknowledge and a conceptualist
Hmm.
concept of foreknowledge, where on the conceptualist model, God simply thinks. He just in his mind conceives of the future, much like we would conceive of a hypothetical situation. Like I can think about what I'm going to do tomorrow. Um, what I'm going to do tomorrow doesn't yet exist. Those scenarios haven't happened. They're not there yet, but I can conceive it in my mind and imagine how it goes. And God can do the same thing with the future, only much better than we can, right? He's God, so
Yeah.
he's omniscient and knows for certain what will happen in the future.
Yeah.
So there's really no need for that perceptualist model, since God in his mind can perfectly conceive of the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I say this because with most theological things, right? They're not just kind of separated from one another. They actually work with one another. Now, I posted something on Facebook recently that some of my friends commented on. It was from the Big Bang Theory, and because there's time like these time travel movies are a regular kind of conversation. They're talking about.
Yeah, new Bill and Ted movie coming out
That's
soon.
right. Yeah, I love time travel movies. By the way, I love any movie that deals with time. I enjoy them, and then they bug me because they all run into the same problem, right? Like,
I haven't seen that new movie yet, too. Christopher Nolan movie, Tenet. Have you heard of that?
no. Oh,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The trailers for that look amazing too. But
so
anyway, sorry,
no,
off
no.
topic.
It's because like I remember going to the movies to watch Interstellar,
Yeah.
and the guy sitting next to me was one of the guys from our youth group, kind of movie junkie, really enjoys stuff like that, and he'd already seen it. And the movie starts, and like 5-10 minutes into it, I just lean over and I say, "I know what's gonna happen." He's like, "What?" And then I just tell him the ending. He's like, "Bro, you just ruined the movie, right?" Like, and I said, "I've thought about this, and then I've read about it, and typically this is the way this kind of sort of stuff works out." And so it's important for people. I mean, watch that stuff, think through it, because my view, for example, really helps with prayer. It really like genuine conversations with God. My view, internet router. Oh, there we're back. Okay, sorry about that, guys. This is strange because I have my iPad in front of me and I'm connected to the same exact router as my laptop, and then my laptop dropped the connection. Like it just wasn't connecting, but my iPad was completely fine. I was chatting with the folks. So hey, man, weird stuff. I don't know. Technology's weird.
Okay, we're gonna
So
do an honor exorcism from your laptop.
I don't know. Get away. Okay. So I was commenting on prayer. I said my view of God's relationship with time helps me with prayer, and prayer being a genuine interaction with God. Okay, like
Yeah.
I pray and He answers, not he made that decision and answered it in eternity past, and then just like it happens now. Even though I think God knew it in the past, but I think He actually makes the decisions as I'm speaking about to Him. The other thing it helps me in my view of time is a moral responsibility. Right. I don't want to go into that, but it it does, meaning that I am guilty. Like and people are guilty when they commit crimes and stuff like that, and you can hold them
Right.
responsible. And then also when it comes to salvation, this is probably the biggest theological thing that it helps me with, is that because if I always see a problem, like if say you're like a time worm, kind of this understanding of that Einstein has. And I think theologically it becomes an issue of when God looks at you at which slice of time is He looking at you, right? Are you His enemy or are you His son? Like what's the reality? And I think that's an issue.
Right.
That's also why I believe in an A theory of time rather than a B theory of time. And so, okay. with that said, because it does have to interact, your view of time has to interact with also this middle knowledge. Like I kind of don't see it in a way where it doesn't have to. You at least have to have some kind of an opinion on this. So, yeah. Okay. What possible theological issues? Now, we just mentioned prayer and stuff. What other theological issues does middle knowledge help with?
Oh man, so many. So, yeah, like Dr. Craig said, middle knowledge is one of the most fruitful theological concepts out there, because it has so many applications to so many different areas in theology. Um, One familiar example would be the problem of evil, right? One of the problems is when we think about God and what He's able to do. The traditional problem is if God is omnipotent, He should be able to get rid of all evil, and if He is omnibenevolent, He's all good, then He should want to get rid of evil. So why is there evil? Middle knowledge comes in to explain that, because if God can create free creatures, then in order to create a world with as much good as there currently is, He may have to allow a certain amount of evil as well, given His decision to create free creatures. So with middle knowledge, God could know that a much greater good could come from allowing a creature to freely choose evil. And that's exactly what Alvin Plantinga described in his free will defense. And it's really interesting that, Luis de Molina came up with the concept of middle knowledge in the 16th century. And it kind of died off because the Catholic Church leaned more towards the view of Thomas Aquinas, which was another, he's the doctor of the Catholic Church, right? He's the guy that Catholics look up to as the philosopher. And so Molina's view kind of died out. But then just this last century, Alvin Plantinga, just doing philosophical work on, God, completely ignorant of middle knowledge, he came up with the same concept and used middle knowledge to support his free will defense. And he didn't have any idea what it is. Somebody had to come up to him and said, "Hey, you're using middle knowledge." And he was like, "What is that?" So it's amazing how strong the concept is and how intuitive it is to people who think very deeply about this subject, that it would come back alive after so many centuries of being kind of looked over. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Two brilliant individuals. No, two brilliant individuals.
Oh, yeah. And if just for your viewers, if they haven't picked up a copy of Alfred Freddoso's translation of Molina's Concordia Part 4, it's called On Divine Foreknowledge, I highly recommend it. Because it's basically reading Molina in his own words, right, in an English translation. And when you read him in his own words, you just realize how brilliant of a philosopher he really was, a philosopher and theologian he was, and how committed to Christ he truly was, and committed to the authority of Scripture, and really doing Scripture service, and bringing in and incorporating deep philosophical commitment to coherence and truth to the biblical text. So really good resource for years.
There you guys go. That's you guys can look into that. Some reading. So the problem of evil is one of them, right? And by the way, the problem of evil is probably in my experience, is the number one question people ask. Even people who aren't really into, thinking about this, it's a natural thing that arises. It's like, well, you're talking about God's goodness and His love and stuff like that. And people go, well, yeah, but like, I know a guy that his kids died, right? And he's a Christian, and if God loves him, then but so it just naturally arises. I've actually had to help people, like, okay, like some atheist guy or something like that, someone doesn't know, they've just said it, and I say, okay, here's the way people formulate that, and then let's talk about it. because it is, we can't just ignore it, right? It is a major issue.
Yeah, on that point, so I'm the global chapters director for Reasonable Faith. I supervise all of our chapters around the world. We have about 180 of them right now. But before I was the global chapters director, I was also a local chapter director out in Monterey, California. And at one of our meetings, there was an atheist who started attending, and we were meeting in a church. And I had advertised the chapter, and he just started coming because he enjoyed talking about religious things and also just being part of a community. And so he started coming to these meetings, and I asked him, I was like, what's your story? And part of his story was that the reason he needed community was because his wife had recently died from cancer. And so what was really interesting is that during the class, he only attended a few times, but during the few times that he attended, one of our regular attendees had a father who also passed away. And so there it was. I was beginning to teach a class on the fine-tuning argument, and my computer shut down. So I couldn't teach that day. And so we had these two people, an atheist who was dealing with the death of his wife, and a lady who was dealing with the death of her father. And so I said, okay, God, you set this up. So we circled the chairs and just, sat down and said, okay, you guys are coming at pain and suffering and evil in the world from two very different perspectives. How is it that you're dealing with this from your individual perspectives? And I've got to tell you, in our class, we were talking about middle knowledge and, the problem of evil and how, the free decisions we make affect the world, and God can use that for a greater good. And it was amazing to see the regular attender, the lady, how confident she was in the fact that even though she was sad that her father was dead, that God was bringing about a greater good out of that suffering, out of that tragedy, that she had a confidence too in salvation in Jesus Christ, because we were also talking about the evidence for the resurrection and how there's good historical evidence for that, and how she was very confident that he was saved in Christ and that she would one day be rejoined with him.
Yeah. So again, because right, we're not machines. Some of us like to be thought of that way. We're actually not these.
I lost your audio again, man.
Hang on. This is insane. I've had more issues today than at any other day, any other stream. So it seems like the internet, which is weird because it seems like the YouTube audience can hear us just well. Okay, I'm hoping this is back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the weirdest day. It's really strange.
It's early in the day, man. You got to get it out of the way early.
Yeah, I know. I hope so, right? Like I hope so. I on Tuesday nights I do Armenian time. I do streams and I answer live questions with our classes, and so hopefully we won't have any issues tonight. So I use the same software. So, but it doesn't seem like it's strange. I was saying that we're not robots. Some people like to think we are and stuff like that, but the older I'm getting as an individual and as a Christian, the more like I realize, hey, just dealing with issues, tough issues, and the kind of confidence I get, like emotional confidence, psychological confidence and stuff like that, it's really important. And having a good grounding of that theologically is even better, because I've seen a lot of people either get very cold in their Christianity, not that they've left the faith or something like that. Whether you believe that can actually happen or not is a secondary question to me. But either get really cold, where just like, not, I don't care about Christianity. Or people actually who just said, I'm not very confident about this. I don't think it's true. It's not for me or something like that, right? But having those answers theologically just gives you a solid foundation because it impacts you. Let's talk about this and then we'll come to an end. People are like, I hope the stream stays. I hope so too, but we've had crazy issues today. What are some counter arguments to middle knowledge?
Yeah.
What do some people say against middle knowledge or argue against it?
So we already covered one area that I think touches on one objection. So one of the things I hear is that on Molinism, God's decisions are based on creatures,
Hmm.
which means he's not sovereign, right? If he has to learn something from his creatures, then how can he be sovereign over everything, right? He's supposed to be omniscient. He doesn't need creatures to know anything. And so that's again that perceptualist understanding of God's omniscience, where he looks
Hmm.
at creatures in the future or something, potential creatures, and then learns something from that. But again, if God is essentially omniscient, he can just imagine in his mind all of the free creatures he could create and then know via his middle knowledge what they would freely do
Yeah.
in any situation, and then incorporate that information into his planning of history. So he doesn't learn anything from creatures because creatures don't exist yet prior to creation. There are no creatures, right? So there's no way that he could learn from the creatures what they would freely do.
Yeah.
So that's just a misunderstanding of the model. Another objection would, this is kind of a more vague sort of gesture question or objection, but some people say that Molinism puts man's freedom on a pedestal and it elevates man's freedom too high, right? It says that man can make decisions that God doesn't directly cause, and therefore man is too free.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the opposite is true, or not the opposite, but that is not true in an appropriate way. That freedom is a necessary condition for moral responsibility. And I think we all kind of intuitively know that. Like if we're, if there's somebody in front of us and somebody pushes us from behind and we run into the person in front of us, we all intuitively know that we were not to blame for pushing the person in front of us. It was the
Mm-hmm.
person behind us. But on a cosmic level, determinism seems very much like that, that God is pushing the dominoes, so to speak, and those dominoes fall on us, right? And we fall into each other, and there's no recourse there. There's no freedom in that. And so it seems like, if we're going to have genuine moral responsibility, there needs to be genuine freedom as well. And what that does is it puts your sin into perspective, I think. And you were talking about that a little bit earlier is our responsibility uh, under a libertarian that freedom actually abases us as sinners. It brings us lower because we realize that our sins and all of the consequences of sin, that ripple effect all across history, all across geography, that is our fault. That's not God's fault because he didn't cause
Mm-hmm.
us to do those things. So, really, instead of elevating man, uh, affirming a robust view of human freedom actually brings us down to where we should be, which is responsible for our sin. And then I also think that instead of elevating man's freedom and putting it on a pedestal, it actually elevates the love of God, because freedom is necessary for loving relationships.
Hmm.
And so, if God doesn't create us to be free, then how can it be said that he enters into a loving relationship with us? There's no reciprocation. He's just loving a non-free object like you would love a favorite rock or something. And that doesn't seem like a relationship that's capable of reciprocation and love, that the type of love that is described in the Bible that we should have for God. So I think rather than putting man's freedom on a pedestal, middle knowledge and Molinism actually enables us to affirm robust human responsibility as well as our loving relationships with God.
Okay. Let me ask you a final question, and then we'll be done.
Yeah,
There's these counterfactual statements we see in the Bible, right?
yeah,
Right. If this were done, Jesus' statement, if this were done in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? If these miracles were done, then they would have, right? That's kind of a
yeah.
proof text that Molinists used for this middle knowledge and stuff. Um, what would be a response to individuals? Because I've had conversations with my friends, and they say, "Well, Art, you're making too much of that statement. It's a hypothetical,
Yeah.
right? It's like you're making way too much of it, trying to say this is an actual kind of counterfactual and stuff." So, what would be a response in a situation like that with even the Bible passages that you quoted earlier and stuff like that? Well, it wasn't necessarily these counterfactuals, but we see when you start seeing the counterfactuals in the Bible, you can't unsee them. It's like one of those
Right.
things where you're just like, oh, there it is again, right? So let's end with maybe a response to that.
So I would almost agree with them that there are certain people who do make too much of them, in that they will say that the biblical verses with counterfactuals are explicit endorsements or explicit teachings of middle knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that that's an incorrect view, because um, Molinists and non-Molinists alike, around the time of the Reformation, when Molina was introducing this doctrine, they all affirmed counterfactuals. What they differed on was when, in God's knowledge, he knew them, right? Did he know them logically prior to his decision to create, or logically posterior to that decision to create? And that was the main dividing line between the Molinists and the non-Molinists. Molina and his compatriots would say that if God knew counterfactuals only after his divine decree, his creative decree, then that would destroy freedom, right? Because God didn't know ahead of time. He couldn't anticipate how we would freely choose. And so therefore he couldn't plan history. And then, but if he did have it beforehand, Molina would say, then he could plan for those free choices. So I would say that we don't want to press the scriptural data too far. We want to allow it to be what it is without trying to press it into the service of our view. But I would say that it is consistent with Molinism, and anybody who says that Molinism is unbiblical has a very long way to go to show that there are any passages in Scripture which preclude the concept of middle knowledge. Because I've asked for such verses, and I've just not found any that are very convincing. So we don't, we don't want to say that those verses on counterfactuals prove middle knowledge in the sense of a mathematical, like it explicitly teaches. It might support middle knowledge, but we also want to say that there doesn't seem to be any biblical data that would preclude or prevent us from affirming middle knowledge.
Okay. Excellent. Man, I had a question. All right. Okay. A comment, not a question. Let me just say this, guys.
Yeah.
It's important, right? Like that when we think about theology, when we think about this stuff, to actually look at the Bible as the authority on it, and then get our teachings from it. And if we're gonna believe something, it shouldn't be even right. Like all my Calvinist friends, I have extremely dear friends who are Calvinists who disagree with me on this stuff. They're fun conversations, right? Over lunch and coffee and all that stuff, in-house conversations. But all of us really aim at elevating Scripture above all things, and then saying we're getting this stuff. We actually believe the Bible teaches this stuff. Not like, oh, Calvinism makes me uncomfortable and therefore I don't want to accept it. Like, that's not my view. I don't think that should be our view. Just because something makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean you reject it because you don't like it. Like, because then if it's like that, you're not going to like many things about God and about Scripture and all that stuff. The reality is that we need to really ground this stuff biblically and say, I think this is actually what the Bible teaches, not the other way around. Not to come up with your theories and then say, here it is. And all of these guys, whether it was Calvin, whether it was Molina, whomever it was, I hope that the desire and the aim is to actually say this is the actual teaching of the Bible, or this is a teaching of the Bible. I can see why these other things are, and that you struggle within these things. Never making these things. I'll just never making these things a point of contention to where you're like telling people they're not Christians if they don't believe it or something like that. And then now you're changing what the gospel actually teaches and how salvation is and what makes someone a Christian, all that stuff. So, I mean, think through them, think about them. Like I said, there's extremely practical ways that some of these doctrines could be used in giving you the confidence and in improving your interaction and your relationship with God. If that is something that you might struggle with, and I know individuals, pastorally, I've dealt with individuals, they're like, why pray? Because if God made this decision in eternity past, like, why even talk to him? Someone made a comment in the comment section where they said they have been told that prayer doesn't do anything. And this comment was made by a Christian. Whether it was made in ignorance or they actually believe this stuff, it could be the case where you say, hey, brother, maybe your theology is incorrect, or the outworking of your theology, you're not seeing it correctly. But here's an alternate view where it might possibly change, your entire prayer life and your interaction with God. Theology matters. Thinking about this stuff matters. And we're not trying to overly complicate things that don't need to be complicated. It's just when you think about God, God is complicated because he's God, and that's just the reality of it. And we do need to be a bit humble within the process of that, because we are thinking about the originator of all things, the one who sustains the universe in existence. And so there needs to be a bit of humility to say, I could be wrong, and I'm willing to change my view on this. So, Sondonic said, God has already determined things. That's why they think. That's most likely why they would have made that statement, by the way. If you guys have any questions, post it here. We'll give like a couple of minutes to this for Tyson. If you guys have any questions for Tyson, you want him to comment on it. If not, we'll end it. So I'm out of my questions, so.
Oh, well, let me just mention one of the other objections I was going to raise, because you kind of mentioned it just now. You were talking about, how complex these types of concepts can be. And that's actually one of the objections that I think people raise, is that Molinism is so complex. The Bible, it doesn't need to be that complex, right? We just need the simple gospel, and that's all we need. First of all, the Bible is not simple, right? You can read it simplistically, but if you're going to understand it and the depths of it, you're going to have to do a lifetime's worth of work. And even in a lifetime, you cannot get to the bottom of it. That's why, for thousands of years, we've been studying the Bible and still are finding new insights and new things to talk about it. So that's not the issue. But also, it's funny to note that really everything is complex to everyone at some point.
That's
right? When you're a baby, using a spoon is really complex. You have to grow up at some point, right? So it's kind of like that with theology too. There are things that seem really complex at first, and if you just dig down deep enough, it becomes simpler, right? Quantum physics seems really complex to everyone in the beginning, and people who study quantum physics for a long time, they have a better grasp. That's right. It becomes easier for them because they're dealing with the issue more often. So anybody who thinks it's too complex right now, I just urge you to continue plugging away at it little by little. Keep digging in, keep watching these videos, keep reading the literature out there until you finally get a grasp on the concepts, because it does get easier.
Yeah. I'll share a little story. I didn't witness this. My wife told me about my children. This whole complexity about kids and how they view things. But my 6-year-old and my 4-year-old were having a conversation about Jesus, and they were praying. We are going to be going back to the United States on the plan is September 6th. So we're coming back, and then we'll do some traveling there and all that stuff. So, there was issues about like the flights getting canceled and all that stuff, and my kids were praying about it, and somehow that evolved into a conversation about Jesus' death for us. And my 6-year-old tells my 4-year-old, Jesus died for our sins and all this stuff. And then they spoke about when it happened. And my 4-year-old said, I think it was like a month ago. And then my 6-year-old said, no, it wasn't a month ago. I think it was like a year ago. Right? So now I say this because, listen, for a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, a month ago and a year ago is a very long time ago. Right? For them, it's like, oh man, a year ago. That's right. And it's complicated for them. And my son, my 6-year-old, loves math. Like he's always like adding stuff and what is this, and so he enjoys those kinds of conversations. And again, when you say 2,000 years ago, like how does he conceptualize? It's complicated, right? But it gets less complicated as you think about it. It's just that's the reality of it. Now, again, that doesn't mean we're going to understand everything perfectly and all that stuff, but I highly recommend, guys, you don't have to agree with any of this stuff, right? Like it's not like you lose your salvation if you don't believe in middle knowledge or something. But the reality is, wherever you may stand in your theology, at least do your due diligence in understanding the opposing views and represent them well when you oppose them, right? Don't like don't make a caricature out of them and just like argue something down that nobody really believes, right? So it's extremely important that we do that. Okay, with that said, Tyson, thanks a lot, man. Thank you for jumping on this and agreeing to do this. Appreciate it. I don't think we mentioned your job. Do you want to mention, and then for those who don't know, could potentially go and benefit from the work that you do? Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, I mentioned it just a little bit a while ago, but I can elaborate a little bit. So I work for Dr. William Lane Craig's ministry, Reasonable Faith. It's an apologetics ministry. And my role, I have two roles. My first role is as global chapters director. So we have local chapters all over the world, 6 continents, almost 180 active chapters right now. And what they do is they basically carry out the mission of Reasonable Faith on a local level. They meet regularly. Obviously, with COVID, they haven't been meeting in person, but they've been meeting online and sharing apologetics material and presenting arguments and evidence for the existence of God and dealing with objections to the Christian faith. And so I supervise those and help open new ones all over the world. Just an amazing privilege that I have to be involved in that. And then my second role is as the director of translations. So we try to get Dr. Craig's material translated into as many different languages all over the world as we can, including Armenian. So I coordinate with many teams all over the world to get those articles, videos, podcasts, all of them translated into other languages.
Okay. So someone said, how does one become a Reasonable Faith director?
Oh, great question. So the first step is to go onto the website, reasonablefaith.org, and look up the chapters link there. And there's an online application. And what that does, that'll send me the personal information needed to be considered to open a chapter. And then I'll send you an email with additional information on the steps, which is basically reading the Reasonable Faith book and completing the study guide, and then providing 2 contact information for 2 references, and then a 1 to 2 page testimony of how you came to Christ and what your personal walk with him looks like today. And that's basically it. And after that, you're certified as a chapter director to basically run a chapter the way you see fit. Our chapters run semi-autonomously. We don't have a set curriculum that you have to follow. So we do that intentionally because the people in front of you, you know them better than we do. And so we want our chapter directors to really take the reins and present the material that their people need.
Awesome. And reasonablefaith.org is an excellent resource, guys. You can just go on there and just type a question you have. Most likely someone's asked it, and Dr. Craig has written an article on it. It's not that he just writes these paragraphs. He writes articles with references. You can actually use some of these articles as a starting point in your research. Just go read the article and then go to his references and start hopping around. You can write a nice research paper where that's your starting point. And they're brilliant because if you have a question, you don't have the time to read a book, it makes sense to actually, at least interact with some content, and think through it. So I use it regularly. And, it's like someone asks me a question, even pastorally, someone comes up, hey, what about this? And I say, that's good. Give me till tomorrow, and that's like one of my first resources. I'll jump there and then I go and look at it and see what he has to say. But use these resources. There's so much content out there. Please use them, guys, because they will help you.
And everything on Reasonable Faith is free.
That's right.
So that's an amazing gift that he has given humanity, is just making all of his material free.
Yeah, it really is. And I have no idea how he puts in the time, where he gets the time from. Maybe he time travels. I don't know.
I have inside information that he's actually a cyborg. So.
Okay. He works like one. Well, Tyson, thanks again, man. Appreciate it. Guys, thank you guys for joining us. Again, if you like this, you enjoy this, share it out. One of the things I'm going to try to do is take these videos these interviews and then chop them up, and then so we can have shorter kind of segments, shareable kind of segments of them. So that should be coming up in the near future, probably when I'm like back in the States and trying to get reestablished, and I don't have the space and to do these interviews until we get that established. But I appreciate it. God bless you guys. God bless you, Tyson. I'm going to end this broadcast now.